Beneath the bustling streets of modern Berlin lies a secret world that Hitler himself walked through in his final days. A labyrinth of tunnels, bunkers, and underground passages that once held the darkest secrets of the Third Reich. For decades, these subterranean corridors were sealed, classified, and forbidden. But now, declassified documents and recent archaeological discoveries have finally revealed the full story of what really happened beneath Berlin during World War II. What you're about to discover will change everything you thought you knew about the final days of Nazi Germany. Welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, hit that subscribe button because today, we're going deep, literally, into one of World War II's most closely guarded secrets. When we think of World War II, we picture battlefields, air raids, and armies clashing across Europe. But beneath Berlin, a different kind of warfare was taking place. A shadow war fought in concrete corridors, where Nazi officials planned their final desperate moves, where countless civilians sought shelter from Allied bombs, and where some of history's most wanted war criminals made their escape. This isn't just another World War II documentary. This is the declassified story of Berlin's underground city, a maze so complex that even today, we're still discovering new sections. We'll explore the engineering marvels, the human tragedies, the last-minute escapes, and the secrets that were buried beneath rubble for over 75 years. By the end of this video, you'll understand why this tunnel network represents one of the most significant archaeological and historical sites of the 20th century, and why some sections remain sealed to this day. So let's descend into the darkness and uncover the truth. To understand Berlin's underground network, we first need to understand the city itself. By 1939, Berlin was the capital of Nazi Germany and one of Europe's largest metropolises, home to over 4 million people. But what most people didn't know was that beneath their feet lay a second Berlin, one that had been developing for decades. The story actually begins long before Hitler came to power. Berlin's underground infrastructure started in the late 1800s with the construction of the U-Bahn subway system. The first line opened in 1902, and by the 1930s, Berlin had one of the most extensive underground transit networks in the world. These tunnels were engineering masterpieces, but they would soon serve a purpose their original designers never imagined. When the Nazi Party took control in 1933, they immediately recognized the strategic value of this underground maze. Hitler and his chief architect, Albert Speer, had grandiose plans to transform Berlin into Germania, the capital of a thousand-year Reich. But their plans included something the public never saw, a massive expansion of the underground network for military and governmental purposes. Between 1933 and 1943, construction crews working in absolute secrecy expanded the existing tunnels and built entirely new subterranean complexes. We're talking about hundreds of kilometers of passages, some as deep as 20 meters below street level. These weren't just simple tunnels, they included command centers, communications hubs, storage facilities, and living quarters designed to allow the Nazi leadership to continue governing even if the city above was destroyed. The workers who built these facilities were often prisoners, forced laborers, and concentration camp inmates. Declassified documents reveal that thousands of people worked on these projects under horrific conditions. Many never saw daylight again. Their story is a crucial part of this narrative. These tunnels were built on humans suffering long before they became shelters from Allied bombs. The German government classified these construction projects under various innocuous names. One major expansion was labeled simply as U-Bahn maintenance. Another was disguised as a modernization of the sewer system. In reality, they were building a fortress beneath the city. By 1940, as the war intensified, the network's purpose evolved again. What started as infrastructure and military facilities became something else entirely, a massive civil defense system. The Nazi leadership knew that eventually, the war would come home to Berlin. And when it did, they wanted to be ready. Let's talk about the engineering feat itself, because the scale of Berlin's underground network is staggering. The system consisted of several distinct layers and types of facilities. At the highest level, meaning the least deep, were the converted U-Bahn tunnels and stations. These were reinforced with concrete and steel to withstand bombing. Blast doors weighing several tons were installed at strategic points, capable of sealing off entire sections if necessary. Below that were the purpose-built public bunkers, known as Hochbunker and Tiefbunker. The Tiefbunker, or deep bunkers, could be as far as 20 meters underground. These were designed to hold thousands of civilians during air raids. Inside, they were equipped with air filtration systems, emergency power generators, water supplies, medical facilities, and even rudimentary living quarters. One of the largest was the Gesundbrunnen bunker complex, which could shelter up to 18,000 people. Imagine that, an entire small town's population packed underground, waiting for the bombs to stop falling. Declassified accounts from survivors describe the claustrophobic terror of these spaces. The stale air, the crying children, the constant vibration of explosions overhead, never knowing if the next bomb would breach the concrete above. But there was another layer still, the deepest and most secretive level. This was the Führerbunker network and the various command facilities reserved for the Nazi elite. The famous Führerbunker where Hitler spent his final days was just the most well-known of these facilities. It was actually part of a much larger complex called the Führerbunker system, connected by tunnels to other government buildings including the Reich Chancellery, the Propaganda Ministry, and various military command centers. These elite bunkers were luxury accommodations compared to the public shelters. Hitler's bunker featured a conference room, private quarters, a map room, and even a small sitting area where he held his last birthday celebration on April 20, 1945. The walls were lined with wood paneling, the floors had carpets, and there was a sophisticated ventilation system that kept the air relatively fresh. The engineering challenge of building these facilities was immense. Berlin sits on sandy, waterlogged soil, which means construction crews had to constantly fight against groundwater seepage. They developed sophisticated pumping systems and waterproofing techniques. Even today, some of the sealed sections remain flooded, their secrets submerged beneath cold, dark water. The tunnels themselves varied in size and construction. Some were barely wide enough for a single person to walk through. These were typically communications conduits or emergency escape routes. Others were large enough to drive vehicles through. Declassified blueprints show that certain tunnels connecting military facilities were designed to accommodate motorcycles and small trucks, allowing for rapid movement of personnel and supplies. One particularly fascinating feature was the communication network. The Nazis installed thousands of kilometers of telephone cables through these tunnels, creating a communications grid that was virtually immune to aerial bombardment. Even as Berlin burned above, orders could still flow through the underground network. Ventilation was another critical challenge. You can't pack thousands of people underground without fresh air. The Germans installed massive air shafts, often disguised as ordinary buildings or structures on the surface. These shafts had filters designed to protect against gas attacks, a paranoid holdover from World War I. Some of these air shafts can still be found today, now hidden in plain sight among Berlin's modern buildings. The bunkers also needed power, and lots of it. Diesel generators were installed in specially ventilated chambers. Fuel storage tanks were built into the system. Some facilities even had hand-cranked generators for emergency backup. The redundancy was impressive. These systems were designed to operate independently for weeks or even months. But perhaps the most chilling feature was the escape routes. The Nazi leadership wasn't planning to go down with the ship. Secret passages connected the government district to the U-Bahn tunnels, which in turn connected to the city's outskirts. Some tunnels allegedly extended beyond the city limits entirely, though many of these routes remain unconfirmed or were destroyed in the final days of the war. The true test of Berlin's underground network came with the Allied bombing campaign. And it was more devastating than anyone could have imagined. The first British air raid on Berlin occurred in August 1940, but these early raids were relatively small. That changed dramatically in 1943 when the Allies launched Operation Gemara and subsequent campaigns designed to break German morale through strategic bombing. Between 1943 and 1945, Berlin endured hundreds of air raids. The RAF bombed at night, the Americans by day. There was no respite. The city above was systematically destroyed. By the war's end, over 50,000 Berliners had been killed in air raids, and more than half the city's buildings were damaged or destroyed. For the civilian population, the underground network became their only refuge. Air raid sirens would wail, and within minutes, hundreds of thousands of people would flood into the tunnels. The public bunkers were supposed to operate on a first-come, first-served basis, but the reality was far more chaotic. Declassified testimonies from survivors paint a horrifying picture. People fought to get underground. Children were separated from parents in the crush. The elderly and disabled often couldn't reach shelter in time. Once the bunkers reached capacity, guards would seal the blast doors, leaving thousands stranded on the surface or in the upper U-Bahn stations, which offered far less protection. Inside the bunkers, conditions deteriorated as the war progressed. The ventilation systems began to fail from overuse and lack of maintenance. Food and water supplies dwindled. Medical supplies ran out. People sat in near-complete darkness to conserve electricity, listening to the muffled thunder of explosions overhead, praying that the concrete would hold. There are documented cases of direct hits on bunker ventilation shafts, which turned the shelters into death traps. Without fresh air, carbon dioxide levels would rise. People would pass out, then asphyxiate. In other instances, near misses would shake the bunkers so violently that concrete dust would fill the air, causing mass panic. But the bunkers also became communities. Long-term residents established territories. Families would return to the same spots raid after raid. People shared food, told stories, and tried to maintain some semblance of normal life in utterly abnormal conditions. Children who grew up during this period spent more of their lives underground than above it. They did homework by candlelight in bunkers. They celebrated birthdays surrounded by strangers in the depths. The U-Bahn system presented unique challenges. The tunnels themselves were relatively safe, but the stations, being closer to the surface, were vulnerable. Several stations suffered direct hits, with catastrophic results. Water mains would burst, flooding sections of tunnel and drowning those trapped inside. Gas lines would rupture, causing explosions or asphyxiation. One of the worst incidents occurred in February 1945, when a bomb penetrated the Stadtmitte U-Bahn station. The explosion breached the tunnel wall, which happened to run directly beneath the Spree River. Water poured in, flooding multiple sections of the U-Bahn network and trapping hundreds of civilians and soldiers. The exact death toll was never confirmed, but estimates range from 100 to several hundred people. Meanwhile, in the deeper command bunkers, the Nazi leadership continued to orchestrate the war. The contrast couldn't be more stark. Civilians huddled in overcrowded public shelters while, a few hundred meters away, Nazi officials worked in comparative comfort, still believing they could somehow win an unwinnable war. Declassified documents reveal the disconnect between the underground command centers and reality on the surface. Military reports flowing into the Führerbunker became increasingly detached from actual conditions. Field commanders knew the war was lost, but Hitler, isolated in his subterranean headquarters, continued to move imaginary armies around maps, planning counterattacks with divisions that no longer existed. The tunnels also became sites of tragedy beyond the bombing. As the situation grew more desperate, the Nazi regime intensified its brutality. The underground network included holding cells and interrogation rooms used by the Gestapo. Political prisoners, suspected resistance members, and anyone deemed disloyal were taken below and never seen again. In the chaos of the war's final months, summary executions became common, the bodies often left in unused tunnel sections or buried in unmarked graves in the bunker complexes. By April 1945, the Soviet Red Army had surrounded Berlin. The battle for the city would be one of the war's bloodiest urban conflicts, and the tunnel network played a central role in these final, chaotic weeks. Hitler had retreated to the Führerbunker on January 16, 1945, and would never emerge alive. Around him, the Nazi leadership fragmented. Some still believed in final victory. Others frantically planned their escapes. The bunker became a surreal mixture of apocalyptic fatalism and desperate scheming. Declassified Soviet intelligence reports reveal that the Red Army knew about the tunnel network and understood its strategic importance. As they tightened the noose around Berlin, Soviet commanders specifically targeted entrances to the underground system. They knew that Nazi forces would use the tunnels for troop movements, supply lines, and potentially escape routes. The Battle of Berlin began on April 16, 1945. Within days, Soviet forces were fighting street by street, building by building, toward the city center. The German defenders, including regular Wehrmacht troops, SS units, Hitler Youth, and elderly men from the Volkssturm militia, used the tunnels to move undetected between defensive positions. The U-Bahn system became an underground battlefield. Soviet soldiers would enter from one station, German defenders from another, and firefights would erupt in the darkness. These were brutal, close-quarters engagements with rifles, submachine guns, and grenades. The tunnels amplified every sound. Gunshots became deafening, screams echoed endlessly, and wounded soldiers' cries would haunt survivors for the rest of their lives. Civilians were caught in the middle. Thousands still sheltered in the bunkers and U-Bahn stations, unable to escape the city and unwilling to face the street fighting above. They huddled in darkness while German and Soviet soldiers fought past them. Many testimonies describe soldiers from both sides simply ignoring the civilians, so focused were they on the immediate tactical situation. On April 22, 1945, Hitler suffered a complete breakdown during a daily conference in the Führerbunker. He finally acknowledged that the war was lost. But rather than surrender, he decided to remain in Berlin and commit suicide. This decision had profound implications for everyone trapped underground with him. The bunker complex became a bizarre twilight zone. Even as Soviet artillery pounded the surface and Red Army troops fought within blocks of the Reich Chancellery, life in the deeper bunkers took on a dreamlike quality. Officers still wore their dress uniforms. Secretaries typed reports that would never be read. Staff officers updated maps showing a situation that changed by the minute. Joseph Goebbels, the propaganda minister, moved into the Führerbunker with his entire family, including 6 children. Other top Nazis came and went through the tunnel connections, still accessible even as the battle raged above. Martin Bormann, Hitler's secretary, essentially controlled who could see the Führer, wielding power until the very end. Meanwhile, some Nazi officials were using the tunnel network to escape. Declassified documents and post-war testimonies reveal that various routes were used to flee Berlin. Some officials used the tunnels to reach the U-Bahn, then traveled to the outskirts where the lines had stations beyond the immediate battle zone. From there, they could attempt to blend in with civilian refugees or make contact with German units still operating outside the city. The tunnel network also played a role in one of the war's great mysteries, the fate of Nazi gold and stolen art. There are numerous accounts, some confirmed, others remaining speculation, of trucks and even small railway cars being loaded with valuables and taken into the tunnel system. Some of these treasures have been recovered over the decades, but others remain missing, presumably still hidden in sealed or collapsed tunnel sections. On April 29, Hitler married his longtime companion Eva Braun in a small civil ceremony in the Führerbunker. The next day, April 30, as Soviet forces closed to within a few hundred meters, Hitler and Braun committed suicide. Their bodies were carried up the emergency exit stairs, doused with gasoline, and burned in a shell crater in the Reich Chancellery garden. But Hitler's death didn't end the nightmare underground. Goebbels, now appointed as the new Reich Chancellor in Hitler's will, held out for one more day. He attempted to negotiate with the Soviets, but when they demanded unconditional surrender, he refused. On May 1, Goebbels and his wife Magda poisoned their 6 children in the bunker, then committed suicide themselves. That same night, several groups attempted to break out of the bunker complex through the tunnels. Bormann, along with Hitler's personal physician Dr. Ludwig Stumpfegger and several others, tried to escape through the U-Bahn tunnels heading north. The exact sequence of events remains debated, but most historians believe Bormann died that night, either killed in the fighting or committing suicide when escape proved impossible. His body was reportedly found in 1972 during construction work, identified through dental records. Other breakout attempts had varying degrees of success. Some individuals managed to blend in with civilians and escape the city. Others were captured by Soviet forces within hours. Still others died in the tunnels, their bodies not discovered for months or even years. The Soviet troops who finally entered the Führerbunker on May 2 found a charnel house. The bodies of the Goebbels family, dead soldiers, abandoned equipment, and the lingering question, where was Hitler? The Soviets found the burned remains in the garden, but Stalin, ever paranoid, refused to publicly confirm Hitler's death for years, preferring to suggest he might have escaped. In the final days of the battle, a decision was made that would turn the tunnel network from refuge into tomb. And to this day, it remains controversial exactly who gave the order. As Soviet forces approached the city center, accounts vary on whether it was SS troops, Wehrmacht engineers, or Hitler himself, ordered the demolition of barriers between the U-Bahn tunnels and the Landwehr Canal. The stated reason was to prevent Soviet troops from using the tunnels to advance. The result was catastrophic. Water from the canal poured into the tunnel network. Within hours, entire sections of the U-Bahn were flooded. But these tunnels weren't empty, they were packed with civilians, wounded soldiers, and refugees. The accounts from survivors are absolutely harrowing. People heard the water coming before they saw it, a rumbling, rushing sound growing louder in the darkness. Then the water appeared, at first just ankle-deep, then rapidly rising. Panic set in immediately. In the narrow tunnels, thousands of people tried to flee in both directions simultaneously. The crush became deadly. People fell and were trampled. Parents desperately tried to lift children above the water. The elderly and wounded couldn't move fast enough. The water, filled with debris and chemicals, rose relentlessly. Declassified Soviet reports and German survivor testimonies describe scenes of unimaginable horror. In some sections, the water rose so fast that people were trapped against the ceiling, with only inches of air space remaining. Some managed to find ventilation shafts and climb to safety. Others clung to pipes and cables, waiting for the water to stop rising, which it eventually did as the flooding equalized across the network. The exact death toll from the flooding has never been confirmed. Estimates range wildly from a few hundred to tens of thousands. The chaos of the battle, the collapse of all record-keeping, and the Soviet occupation all made an accurate count impossible. In the immediate aftermath, recovery efforts were complicated by ongoing fighting, and many bodies were simply left where they had drowned. Some sections remained flooded for months. When the water was finally pumped out, recovery teams found the remains of civilians and soldiers alike, often impossible to identify. Mass graves were dug. Families never learned what happened to missing relatives. The flooded tunnels became just one more atrocity in a war filled with them. There's a particularly tragic footnote to this story. Many of those who drowned in the tunnels had survived years of bombing. They had made it through the entire war, only to die in the final days, killed not by enemy action but by a desperate scorched earth tactic that achieved nothing of military value. The flooding also destroyed or damaged significant portions of the tunnel network's infrastructure. Communications cables were ruined. Electrical systems shorted out. Structural damage occurred as the water pressure and weight stressed supports designed for very different load conditions. Even after the water was pumped out, many sections remained unstable and dangerous. In the decades since, Berlin has had to deal with the consequences of this flooding. Some tunnel sections were permanently sealed because the damage was too extensive to repair. Others required massive reconstruction efforts. And there are sections that remain flooded to this day, their contents unknown, treated as underwater archaeological sites too dangerous or expensive to excavate. When the Red Army captured Berlin, they immediately took control of the tunnel network. And what they found fascinated and concerned them in equal measure. Soviet intelligence units systematically explored and mapped the underground network. They were looking for several things: hidden Nazi officials, stolen treasures, military equipment, and intelligence documents. They found all of these and more. Declassified Soviet archives reveal the extent of their discoveries. In various bunkers and tunnel complexes, they found tons of military equipment, including ammunition, weapons, and communications gear, stolen art and valuables from across occupied Europe, tons of documents, including military records, intelligence files, and Nazi Party archives, scientific equipment and research materials from various programs, the bodies of Nazi officials who had committed suicide, and hundreds of civilians, both dead and alive, who had been trapped underground. The Soviets were particularly interested in any intelligence related to Nazi Germany's research programs, including their atomic research, rocket technology, and chemical weapons. They systematically looted anything of value, shipping entire trainloads of materials back to the USSR. But they also faced an immediate practical problem. Tens of thousands of civilians were still underground, many in desperate condition. The bunker's resources were exhausted. Food was gone. Water supplies were contaminated. Medical supplies had run out weeks earlier. Disease was spreading in the cramped, unsanitary conditions. The Soviet authorities, despite their reputation, actually organized significant relief efforts for the bunker populations. They established field hospitals, brought in food and water, and began the massive task of evacuating people to the surface. This was partly humanitarian, but also practical. Leaving thousands of desperate people underground was a security risk. However, the Soviets also used control of the bunkers to identify and capture Nazi officials trying to hide among civilians. NKVD agents, working with German communists and informers, screened everyone emerging from the underground. Anyone with SS tattoos, anyone identified as a Nazi party member, anyone who had worked for the government, all were arrested. Some sections of the tunnel network, particularly those connected to government and military sites, were sealed off completely. The Soviets didn't want anyone to know what they'd found or what they might still be searching for. Guards were posted, and German civilians were forbidden from approaching these areas under penalty of death. As Berlin was divided into occupation zones, Soviet, American, British, and French, the tunnel network was divided along with it. This created a bizarre situation where a continuous underground system was now split among four powers. Some tunnels crossed zone boundaries underground even though there was no legal crossing point above. When the Cold War intensified and Germany was divided into East and West, Berlin's tunnel network took on new strategic importance. The U-Bahn continued to operate, but certain lines that crossed between East and West Berlin became ghost stations. They passed through East Berlin without stopping, the platforms sealed and guarded. Underground, the barriers between East and West weren't always as clear as they were on the surface. This led to one of the Cold War's most famous underground incidents, the construction of spy tunnels. While the most famous is the American-British Operation Gold tunnel from West to East Berlin to tap Soviet communications cables, there were actually multiple tunnels dug for espionage purposes on both sides. But what many people don't know is that these Cold War spy tunnels sometimes intersected with or utilized parts of the old Nazi-era tunnel network. Declassified documents reveal that both NATO and Warsaw Pact intelligence agencies studied the WW2's-era tunnel maps, looking for routes that could be repurposed. The East German government, the DDR, was particularly paranoid about the old tunnel network being used for espionage or escape attempts. And with good reason. Several successful escapes from East to West Berlin were made through old tunnel sections, sewers, and newly dug passages. The most famous escape tunnel, Tunnel 57, helped 57 people escape in October 1964. In response, the East Germans conducted extensive surveys of the underground network beneath their territory. They sealed numerous tunnel entrances, filled in some sections entirely, and kept others under constant surveillance. Ironically, this preservation effort, though motivated by security concerns, actually helped protect many historical tunnel sections from destruction or development. Meanwhile, on the West Berlin side, the municipal government faced a different challenge: what to do with all these bunkers and tunnels. Some were converted for civilian use. The deeper bunkers became storage facilities, archives, even mushroom farms. The dark, humid environment was perfect for growing mushrooms, and several commercial operations utilized old bunkers for this purpose. Other bunkers were maintained as emergency shelters, but now for a different threat: nuclear war. During the Cold War, West Berlin's government stockpiled food, water, and medical supplies in the bunker network, enough to theoretically shelter hundreds of thousands of people for weeks in case of Soviet nuclear attack. Some sections were simply abandoned and forgotten. Entrances were bricked over, covered by new construction, or otherwise obscured. As the generation that remembered the war aged and died, knowledge of certain tunnel sections died with them. Maps were lost or remained classified. Berlin's underground became a partially forgotten world. The fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989 and the reunification of Germany in 1990 changed everything for the tunnel network. Suddenly, sections that had been sealed for 45 years became accessible again. Urban explorers were among the first to penetrate these forgotten spaces, often illegally. Their photos and accounts, shared online, revealed rooms frozen in time, Nazi propaganda posters still on walls, equipment covered in decades of dust, personal belongings left behind and never retrieved. But the real revelations came when professional archaeologists and historians gained access. What they found has fundamentally changed our understanding of Berlin's World War II history. In the early 1990s, the Berlin Underworlds Association, Berliner Unterwelten, was formed. This organization, combining historians, archaeologists, engineers, and volunteers, began the systematic exploration and preservation of the tunnel network. They've since conducted hundreds of expeditions, documented thousands of sites, and opened several sections to the public as museums. Their discoveries have been remarkable. In sealed bunker rooms, they found personal diaries and letters from civilians who sheltered there, providing first-hand accounts of the bombing and final battle-complete medical facilities, still equipped with 1940s-era surgical tools and medicines, classrooms where children continued their education, underground makeshift chapels where people prayed during the bombardment, art created by civilians passing time in the bunkers, drawings, carvings, even musical instruments, and in more than a few cases, human remains of people who died underground and were never recovered. Each discovery adds layers to our understanding of what life was like for ordinary Berliners during the war's final years. These weren't just military installations, they were underground cities where people lived, loved, gave birth, and died. The archaeological work has also revealed the extent of the forced labor used to build the tunnels. In several sections, researchers found evidence of extremely poor working conditions, including sleeping areas that were barely more than cages, evidence of minimal food rations, and in some tragic cases, the remains of laborers who died during construction and were buried in the walls. One particularly significant discovery came in 2015 when construction crews excavating for a new building project broke through into a previously unknown section of tunnel connected to the Reich Chancellery. The sealed room contained filing cabinets full of documents, personnel records, meeting minutes, and intelligence reports. Historians are still analyzing these materials, which fill in gaps in our knowledge of the Nazi government's final months. Modern technology has also aided exploration. Ground-penetrating radar has been used to map tunnel sections without excavating them. 3D laser scanning creates detailed models of accessible areas. Drones equipped with cameras can navigate flooded sections, revealing what lies beneath the dark water. These surveys have revealed that we still don't know the full extent of the network. There are sections indicated on old maps that haven't been rediscovered. There are rumors of deeper levels, though these remain unconfirmed. And there's the persistent question of what might still be hidden in the sealed or flooded sections. The tunnel network has also become a significant tourist attraction. The Berliner Unterwelten offers guided tours of selected bunkers and tunnel sections. Visitors can walk through the same corridors where civilians sheltered from bombs, see the equipment they used, and experience, in a very small, safe way, what it might have been like to live underground. But not everything is open to the public. Many sections remain too dangerous: structural instability, contamination, unexploded ordnance. Some areas are still classified for security reasons. And there's an ongoing ethical debate about how to treat these spaces. They're historical sites, but they're also graveyards. They contain important artifacts, but also painful memories for survivors and their families. Modern Berlin has to balance preservation with development. The city is building new infrastructure, new buildings, new U-Bahn lines. This construction regularly encounters the old tunnel network. Sometimes, projects are redesigned to preserve historical sections. Other times, economic realities dictate that old bunkers must be demolished or filled in. There have been accidents too. In 2012, construction crews accidentally breached a sealed bunker, releasing a pocket of toxic gas that had been trapped since 1945. Fortunately, no one was seriously injured, but the incident highlighted the ongoing dangers lurking beneath the city. Environmental concerns also play a role. Some bunkers contain hazardous materials: asbestos insulation, chemical storage tanks, fuel residue. Cleanup is expensive and complicated. There's also the question of contamination from human remains. Decomposition in sealed, airless environments creates biological hazards that require specialized handling. Despite decades of exploration, Berlin's underground network still holds secrets. And some of these mysteries are absolutely fascinating. Let's start with the most famous, the Amber Room. This priceless chamber, created in the 18th century with panels of amber backed with gold leaf, was looted by the Nazis from the Catherine Palace near St. Petersburg. It disappeared during the war. While most historians believe it was destroyed in the bombing of Königsberg, there are persistent rumors that it was transported to Berlin in the final months of the war and hidden in the tunnel network. No evidence has ever been found, but treasure hunters continue to search. Then there's the question of Hitler's remains. The official story is that the Soviets recovered his partially burned body, conducted autopsies, then kept the remains in various secret locations before finally cremating them completely in 1970 and scattering the ashes. But conspiracy theories persist that the body found in 1945 was a double, and that Hitler escaped through the tunnels. These theories are almost certainly false. The evidence for Hitler's death is overwhelming, but they demonstrate the lingering mystique of the underground network as a place where anything might have happened. More credible are mysteries about Nazi officials who did escape. We know many used the tunnels, but we don't know all their routes or where they went afterward. Some made it to South America. Others disappeared into the chaos of post-war Europe. Declassified intelligence documents show that Allied and Soviet agencies were tracking escaped Nazis for decades, and the trail often led back to Berlin's tunnels. There's also the poison cabinet, allegedly a sealed room somewhere in the bunker complex where the Nazi leadership stored stockpiles of chemical weapons and poisons for use in a last-ditch defense of Berlin. Hitler was paranoid about a repeat of World War I's gas warfare, and had ordered the production and storage of chemical weapons as a deterrent. But these stockpiles have never been fully accounted for. Are they still down there, somewhere in a sealed room, slowly degrading into even more dangerous compounds? Another mystery involves the fate of countless art objects and valuables looted from across Europe. The Nazis were systematic in their theft, particularly from Jewish families and occupied territories. Much of this was stored in various locations across Germany, including in Berlin's tunnels. While the Allies and Soviets recovered significant amounts, inventories suggest that huge quantities are still missing. Some may have been destroyed, some stolen by individuals during the chaos, and some might still be hidden underground. There are also persistent reports of unexplored tunnel branches, secret rooms, and hidden passages. During renovation work on existing buildings, construction crews occasionally break through into unknown bunker sections. Each discovery raises the question, what else is down there that we haven't found? Urban legends abound, too. There are stories of tunnel ghosts. People claim to hear sounds of crying children, marching boots, or air raid sirens when exploring certain sections at night. Skeptics attribute these to acoustics, wind through ventilation shafts, or the power of suggestion. But the stories persist, passed among urban explorers and even some professional researchers. One particularly intriguing mystery involves a series of small concrete rooms found in a section of tunnel beneath the former Gestapo headquarters. These rooms contained chains, evidence of fires, and disturbing markings on the walls. They appear to have been torture or interrogation cells, but there are no surviving records indicating their exact purpose or how many people suffered there. The discovery has raised difficult questions about how to memorialize such places. There's also the mystery of the tunnel's full extent. Every few years, another connection is discovered, another section mapped. Ground-penetrating radar suggests there may be tunnel sections at depths we haven't fully explored. Could there be a fourth or even fifth level to the network? Without comprehensive excavation, which would be monumentally expensive and disruptive, we may never know the full truth. Some mysteries are more recent. During the Cold War, both East and West Germany conducted operations in the tunnel network. Many of these remain classified. What exactly was done in those tunnels between 1945 and 1990? Declassified documents have revealed some operations, but intelligence agencies on both sides almost certainly used the tunnels in ways that remain secret. But beyond the military history and the mysteries, the most important stories are human ones. Real people lived, struggled, and died in these tunnels. Their stories deserve to be told. Gertrude Schneider was 12 years old in 1945. Her family spent the final months of the war living almost permanently in a bunker beneath their apartment building. In an interview recorded in the 1990s, she described the daily routine, rationing the small amount of food they had, trying to sleep through the bombing, listening to the adults whisper about news from the front, slowly realizing that their world was ending. She remembered the smell, thousands of unwashed bodies, overflowing latrines, the acrid scent of concrete dust that never quite settled. She remembered the sounds, babies crying, the elderly praying, teenage boys trying to act brave, and beneath it all, the constant, terrifying percussion of bombs hitting the surface. Gertrude survived. She emerged into a ruined city, lost her father to Soviet imprisonment, and eventually emigrated to West Germany. But she never forgot those months underground. "We lived like rats," she said. "Hiding in the dark, afraid of everything above us." Then there's the story of Dr. Ernst Gunther Schenk, a Wehrmacht doctor who worked in the Führerbunker during the final days. He described the surreal contrast between the desperate situation outside and the bizarre normality attempted inside. Officers still saluted Hitler. Secretaries still maintained filing systems. The pretense of government continued even as the Reich collapsed. But Schenk also described the humanity he witnessed. Soldiers sharing their last cigarettes with each other. Secretaries comforting Hitler's Alsatian dog, Blondie, before Hitler had it poisoned to test his cyanide capsules. The cook who continued to prepare meals as if it mattered what anyone ate. Even in the depths, even at the end, people clung to routines and kindnesses. Schenk also witnessed the atrocities. He described Hitler's deterioration, the trembling hands, the paranoid rages, the complete disconnect from reality. He was present when the Goebbels children were poisoned, though he was not allowed to intervene. He saw Magda Goebbels' moments after she murdered her own children, her face expressionless, already dead inside though she would live a few more hours. After the war, Schenk's testimony helped historians piece together the final days in the Führerbunker. He died in 1998, one of the last living witnesses to those events. Another remarkable story is that of Rokas Misch, Hitler's bodyguard and telephone operator. He was one of the last people to see Hitler alive and one of the last to leave the bunker complex. In his memoirs and interviews, Misch provided detailed accounts of daily life in the underground headquarters. He described Hitler as often kind to staff, asking about their families, remembering birthdays. This humanity sat alongside monstrous decisions that killed millions. Misch struggled with this contradiction for the rest of his life. He wasn't a major war criminal, he was a functionary, a telephone operator. But he served evil, and he knew it. Misch attempted to escape through the U-Bahn tunnels on May 2, 1945, but was captured by Soviet forces. He spent 9 years in Soviet prison camps before being released. He returned to Berlin and lived quietly until his death in 2013 at age 96, the last living witness to Hitler's final days. There are also stories of resistance in the tunnels. Communist and social democratic activists used portions of the tunnel network to hide from the Gestapo, print illegal newspapers, and shelter people targeted by the Nazi regime. Some of these resistance cells operated for years before being discovered. One group, led by a man named Anton Safekow, used access to the U-Bahn tunnels to move weapons and supplies for resistance activities. They were eventually betrayed and captured in 1944. Safekow and most of his associates were executed. But during interrogation, they refused to reveal the full extent of the tunnel network they'd used, protecting routes that other resistance members could continue to use. And there are the love stories, because even in war, even underground, life continued. Couples met in the bunkers. Relationships formed during long nights waiting for the all-clear. Marriages were performed by candlelight in underground rooms. Children were conceived and even born in the depths. One particularly touching story involves a young couple, Hans and Liesel, who met in a bunker in 1943. They married in 1944 in a brief ceremony above ground, then spent their wedding night in the bunker because the air raids resumed. Their daughter was born underground in March 1945, delivered by a retired midwife also sheltering there. The baby's first cry echoed through tunnels built for war, a sound of life in a place of death. That baby, Greta, lived until 2018. She kept her birth certificate, which listed her place of birth as Tiefbunker, Friedrichshain. In interviews, she said she always felt a strange connection to underground spaces. Not fear, but familiarity, as if some part of her remembered her first home. So what do we take from this history? What lessons does Berlin's underground network teach us? First, it's a reminder of the incredible lengths humanity will go to for survival. The engineering achievement represented by these tunnels is remarkable. But it was driven by fear and war. Imagine if that effort, that ingenuity, that resource expenditure had been directed toward peace instead of preparing for destruction. Second, the tunnel network stands as physical evidence of Nazi Germany's crimes. These weren't just bomb shelters, they were built partly with slave labor. They housed Gestapo interrogation cells. They enabled the Nazi leadership to continue the war even as defeat became inevitable, prolonging suffering for millions. The preserved sections, now museums, serve as education sites. German schoolchildren tour these bunkers, learning about the consequences of fascism, militarism, and totalitarianism. They see where ordinary people sheltered from bombs that fell because their country started a war of aggression. They see where Nazi leaders hid while soldiers and civilians died above them. These are uncomfortable but necessary lessons. Third, the tunnels remind us of the resilience of ordinary people. The civilians who endured years of bombing, who maintained community in underground darkness, who protected their children and helped their neighbors, their courage deserves remembrance alongside the condemnation of the regime they lived under. The tunnel network also has modern relevance. As climate change, political instability, and conflict continue to shape our world, urban planners and civil defense experts study Berlin's World War II bunkers to understand what worked and what didn't. How do you shelter millions of people? How do you maintain order? How do you prevent panic? How do you ensure equitable access to protection? There's also an archaeological and preservation lesson. These tunnels are fragile. They're deteriorating. Some sections have already been lost to development or collapse. We have a limited window to document and preserve what remains. Future generations will judge whether we valued this history enough to protect it. The tunnel network has become part of Berlin's identity. The city has chosen not to hide from this difficult past, but to confront it directly. The bunker museums are popular tourist destinations, but they're not sensationalized or glorified. They're presented soberly, as memorials to suffering and as warnings against the ideologies that caused it. Finally, the ongoing discoveries in the tunnel network remind us that history isn't fixed. We're still learning, still uncovering new information. Each sealed room opened, each document found, each survivor testimony recorded adds to our understanding. The past isn't dead, it's not even past, as Faulkner wrote. It's beneath our feet, waiting to be discovered. Berlin's underground tunnel network is more than just a historical curiosity. It's a three-dimensional document of World War II, preserving evidence of Nazi ambition, civilian suffering, military desperation, and human resilience. From the pre-war construction to the bombing campaigns, from Hitler's final days to the flooding that killed thousands, from the Cold War division to modern rediscovery, this network has witnessed and preserved some of the 20th century's most significant events. Today, you can walk through some of these tunnels. You can see the bunkers where families huddled during air raids. You can stand in the communications room where desperate orders were issued in the Reich's final hours. You can touch the concrete walls that separated life from death, safety from annihilation. But you're also walking through a grave, through a memorial, through a warning. These tunnels speak to us across the decades, telling us what happens when extremism takes power, when war comes home, when ideology matters more than humanity. The declassified stories from beneath Berlin are finally being told in full. And they're stories we need to hear, not to glorify or sensationalize, but to understand and remember. Because the depths beneath Berlin hold truths about who we can become at our worst, and who we might be at our best. If you found this deep dive into history valuable, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel. We have more declassified stories coming, exploring the hidden histories that shaped our world. Drop a comment below. What aspect of Berlin's tunnel network did you find most fascinating? Are there other underground historical sites you'd like us to explore? For more content like this, check out the videos linked on screen. And hit that notification bell so you don't miss our next investigation into history's buried secrets. Until next time, remember, the past is always closer than we think. Sometimes, it's right beneath our feet.